Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack a genuinely fascinating chapter of human history. We'll be exploring how the world as we know it wasn't just shaped by settled cities with towering stone walls, but equally by wandering nomads. We're going to see exactly how these two, well, seemingly completely opposite ways of life, clashed, blended, and ultimately drove the entire course of civilization.
So I want you to start by picturing an empire in your head right now. What do you see? If you're like most of us, you're probably envisioning massive stone cities, really complex bureaucracies, and rigid borders guarded by standing armies. We just kind of naturally assume that an empire has to involve rooted permanence. But today, we're actually going to challenge that assumption. I mean, what if the largest contiguous empire in history was built by people who didn't even have a permanent capital?
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the classical world order, move into the rise and fall of Rome, tackle the Nomadic Paradox, explore the Mongol transcontinental empire, and finally wrap up with connected continents.
Section 1, the classical world order. Okay, let's dive right into where this all began.
Take a look at the sprawling trade networks across the Mediterranean, Persia, and Arabia. Following the early empires in Mesopotamia, by the 6th century BCE, Iranians actually established control over major parts of Assyrian territory. The big takeaway from looking at this geography is just how absolutely vital it was for establishing these vast, interconnected networks of commerce across both land and sea.
And that interconnectedness totally skyrocketed with Alexander the Great. In the late 4th century BCE, he went on this series of sweeping military campaigns, taking over parts of North Africa, West Asia, and Iran. Throughout those areas, Greek ideals and cultural traditions were shared with the locals, a process known as becoming Hellenized. But it definitely wasn't a one-way street. While Greek became a super widespread language, Iranian culture was just as important and honestly sometimes more so than those Hellenistic notions. This blending created an incredibly sophisticated, settled cultural landscape.
Section 2, Rise and Fall of Rome. Taking full advantage of the political discord after Alexander, Rome stepped in and established immense control. Tracking this timeline, by 27 BCE, Octavian founded the Principate. Jump ahead a bit to 115 CE, and we see the Roman Empire at its absolute greatest physical extent. Latin became the main language, though Greek was still heavily used over in the East. But the political structure was never just frozen in place. It evolved continuously, leading to massive shifts in power and eventually the dramatic events of the late 4th century, like the destruction of the Serapeum at Alexandria. And honestly, nothing illustrates the sheer scale and rooted permanence of classical empires quite like Roman engineering. Built in 79 CE, the Colosseum wasn't just a combat arena. It was a monumental feat that could hold a staggering 60,000 people. Just think about the logistical and economic stability you need just to source that much stone, feed all those workers, and manage the crowds. It's literally the epitome of the material location we associate with a settled empire. But of course, empires aren't just made of stone. They're built on beliefs. A really pivotal transformation happened in the 4th century CE. After the Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity in 312 CE, the Roman Empire was substantially Christianized. This process, where Christianity spread and ultimately triumphed as the state religion, fundamentally altered the entire social fabric of the Mediterranean world. Section 3, the Nomadic Paradox. Now, this is where our story takes a really unexpected turn. We are faced with what historians call the oxymoron of the nomadic empire. On one hand, classical empires are defined by stability, huge administrations, and massive cities. On the other hand, nomads are the quintessential wanderers, historically organized in simple family assemblies with what looks like pretty rudimentary political organization. The term nomadic empire almost feels like a contradiction, right? I mean, how does a society without cities end up ruling the world? It's a perfect visual contrast. On one side, you have an intricate coin representing a settled, stable, highly administered economy. On the other side, the dynamic horse rider represents the constant mobility that was the lifeblood of the nomad. But actually, scratch the idea that this mobility meant a lack of sophistication. That's a huge misconception. Because their movement wasn't just aimless wandering. It was a highly structured, incredibly strategic adaptation to a really harsh environment, a concept known as transhumance. This is the herdsman's regular annual movement between higher mountain regions and low-lying ground to find pasture for their flocks. Doing this successfully required deep ecological knowledge, serious discipline, and tight-knit social coordination. Section 4, the Mongol Transcontinental Empire. Let's trace how this nomadic power scaled up. We start with the establishment of the Turkish Empire around 1075, but the real game changer happens in 1206 when Genghis Khan consolidates power over the Mongol tribes. By the 13th and 14th centuries, the Mongols had built a transcontinental empire that literally straddled Europe and Asia. In sheer territorial scope, they absolutely dwarfed the massive agrarian-based empires in neighboring China.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is that nomadic societies were not insulated islands. They didn't just exist in a vacuum out on the steppe. The Mongols might have inhabited a less materially complex world than agrarian China, but they were deeply observant. They constantly interacted with, deeply impacted, and critically learned from the larger settled agrarian world. They adapted their own traditional customs to successfully govern an unprecedented landmass.
Section 5. Connected continents. When we look back at the rich agrarian and craft societies of the time, the history reveals this constant cycle of innovation and inheritance. The achievements of one empire, whether that was Roman administration, Greek culture, Persian agriculture, or nomadic military tactics, were always taken up and adapted by whoever came next. Over time, the whole region was marked by this rich tapestry of Persian, Greek, Latin, and Arabic influences blending together. To summarize the core themes we've unpacked today, history was far more complex than just a straight line of progress. We see harsh realities like slavery deeply rooted in the ancient Mediterranean. But at the exact same time, we see remarkable state formations emerging from humble Bedouin nomadic traditions. We see shared cultural ideals uniting incredibly distant populations. And above all, we see interconnected trade driving continuous global advancements. Human interaction, whether through fierce conquest or bustling trade, really is the true engine of history. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. If a civilization of supposed wanderers, organizing primarily on horseback, can build the largest contiguous empire in human history, what other limits of human organization are we completely wrong about? Our assumptions about what a society needs to be successful are constantly being challenged by history. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the past, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.